I'm Mike Bursell. I've been using open source for getting on for 25 years. I have used Linux as my main desktop for over 20 years now, definitely, which I'm quite proud of, for work and home. So that's something I'm always quite proud of. I'm a security guy. And last year, I got funding from with some other folks to start a new company around an open source project. So I thought it might be interesting for you folks to find out about what that was, what that involved, some of the pitfalls, some things we did right. I really appreciate your coming along to this session because there are other sessions you could go to. For those of you who are watching recording of this, hello from whatever time zone you're in. It's really nice to have you, and thanks for choosing to participate.
And Mike, how would you like folks to ask you questions? Would you like them to put it in chat, Q&A, raise their hand, or wait to the end?
If you have questions sort of as I'm speaking, try putting in the chat. I'll keep an eye on it. I'll do it if I can. And then Q&A, we'll do some Q&A at the end as well. I'll keep a big block, but if you have questions, I'll see if I can respond. It doesn't always work, but we'll give it a go. How about that?
Sounds good to me. And with that, I'm going to mute myself and stop my video and let you take over.
Thank you very much indeed. So yeah, I am Mike Bursell. I am co-founder of NARCS, the project, and CEO and co-founder of Profian. Next slide, please. So this is the abstract. I always like to put this in to remind myself what I'm supposed to be talking about. Hopefully I'll do some of these things. You can read this, and this is presumably why you're here, so I won't go over it again. Next slide, please. So this is what I'm going to talk about. First of all, I'm going to introduce you to the founders of the project and of the company. Then talk about why we started the project, and then why we did a startup, and then starting up the startup. So let's go to the next slide, please. Actually, let's move to slide. Yeah, there are quite a few quick ones coming through here. So, right, once upon a time, next. There were two red hatters. Next. Who got talking in a bar in Brno? We were at a conference and we started talking about, yep, next. About theology, carry on. And we kept talking about security. Next. And we had some ideas, next. And started a project. And this is the story of what happened next. So I'm one of those people. I'm drinking tea in that picture. Could you make me put my video on again as well? There we go. I'm drinking tea now from a mug saying Profian in, and Nathaniel is the other guy. He's my co-founder. Next. And how did the project start? Next. Amber's helping me out here because Zoom decided it didn't want to play nicely with my Linux desktop. So Nathaniel came and said, I have these 3 patent ideas. Next. And we talked and we decided we have these 5 patent ideas. Next. Which might really be business ideas. So patents are, things about inventions and stuff, but we decided maybe there's more to it than that. So next. And we took it to our execs and they said, well, it looks interesting, but probably can't do it. Probably doesn't never work. You'll never make it happen. But hey, give it a go. So next, we founded a project. We founded the NARCS project. I am wearing the t-shirts, as you can see today. Hurrah, t-shirt, NARCS. We were the co-founders and the initial resources provided by Red Hat, for which thank you very much indeed. Next. And so what's it for? First of all, it's open source. It's Apache 2.0. In fact, we've just introduced some AGPL recently as well. It's language neutral. It allows you to, we provide a runtime platform. It's a security project. It's vendor neutral. We support multiple different hardware platforms. It requires things called trusted execution environments. So very brief idea is that there are some people can't put stuff in the cloud because it's just someone else's computer. If you're a high regulated industry, for instance, you can't put stuff in the cloud. You can do it, but it's very difficult. It requires specific hardware, and we make it easy to use that hardware. So that's it. Next. So we found it in 2018. Next. And it was made part of a Linux Foundation project called the Confidential Computing Consortium, which is about encouraging open source use of these trusted execution technologies. Next. So, but I didn't really come here to talk about the project itself. We'd love you to come and find out more about the project. And I'll tell you where to do that in a bit. But let's go to the next slide and say why we want to do a startup. So, came to the end of 2020 and we were at Red Hat and we had some discussions with the execs again. And it was at where should NARCS, the project, end up? And it was at, well, there's no obvious short-term fit for NARCS within Red Hat. And NARCS is something which wasn't going to be product ready for a while back in 2020. And the Red Hat folks were saying, well, we need to have something we can put into product. Or we're going to have to, well, not kill it, but remove resources. And we said, well, there's a third option, right? We could do a startup. That was a bit of a surprise, but they said, okay, let's talk about that. So next slide. Before we go on to that, what that meant, I want to go back to the question of why we wanted to do this at open source, because this is important to the whole story. First of all, this is a security product, right? And in order to have the highest level of security, we truly believe that everything needs to be visible and auditable and open source. We also believe that it shouldn't just be the software that's open. It should be all of our meetings. So all of our daily stand-ups are open. Our chat, all of our development chat, infrastructure chat is open. Our design process is open. We want the whole process of the project to be as open as possible. Because if it's not open source, you just can't have technical assurances in the code. So let's go to the next slide. I'll try and talk about how it comes. So what else? Why else do we think it should be open source? First of all, we believe in open source. We think open source is the right thing to do. The other thing is we really wanted to grow a community to push adoption of this stuff because we think it's really cool and we think other people think it's cool and it's important. And, Docker is a great example of this. I know there have been some problems, in the longer time with them, but the way they started up was really great. They just got people involved. They said, let's create something which is a platform that you can try out, you can use, get developers to come to it, make it happen. And that was a model that we really got excited about. Let's build something that people can build stuff on top of. If they want to get involved in the low level stuff, that's great. But if they just want to get involved in trying stuff on top, that's also good as well. So the other thing that was good about open source from our point of view is the Red Hat patent promise. I can't say enough good things about this. This is absolutely fantastic. So Red Hat creates patents, files patents like many other large companies. But it has a very good view, in my opinion, of open source and patents. And they say, look, for any patent that we hold, we will grant a non-exclusive lifetime license to any implementation which is fully open source, which meant that, we've put some patents together when we were at Red Hat. I talked about, some at the beginning, which meant as long as you kept stuff open source, that was good. We were protected. So that was a really important thing to us. And well done, Red Hat, for that. It's a view we really like. I would also encourage people to look at the LOT network, and the Open Invention Network, both really important for patents and IP protection in this sphere. You need to understand this if you want to start a company around open source. Next slide, please. But why did we want to do startup? What made us think this would be a good idea? Next slide. It was simple. If Red Hat wasn't going to take it forward, we had to do it because we just couldn't see ourselves doing anything else. We were just passionate about it, and that passion is there. It's still important. And believe me, we needed it because this is not an easy thing to be doing. Next slide. So this is kind of where it gets interesting. Let's talk about starting up the startup next. Well, what do you need to create a startup? Well, a few things. You need some people because you can't actually have to do something. And so there was me and Nathaniel, and we identified a couple of other people who might come along as well. You need some money if you're going to pay anyone. And we wanted to be paid. We've both got families. You need some money from somewhere. You need a business plan, because people aren't going to give you money unless you can come up with a business plan. And you need something called a pitch deck. A pitch deck, oh, what a joyous, horrible thing a pitch deck is. It's kind of a maximum of 12 slides that you can give to people basically in anything from 2 to 50 minutes, normally more like 5, which gives them an idea of why they should give you money, what you're doing, what's relevant. And we also need a proof of concept, so you can show them that what you're doing actually works and it's not vaporware, you haven't made it up. So those are the key things, apart from one extra thing. Next slide. We needed a clue, and we just had no clue what we were doing, honestly. So let's go to the next slide and talk about what we ended up doing. So these are the things that we ended up actually needing, and I'll go through this briefly. We had an existing project, bottom right, so that was great. So we had something there. I'd written a bunch of articles, so that was good. We were involved with a couple of industry bodies. So the Bytecode Alliance for WebAssembly, the Confidential Computing Consortium, for NARCs. We worked an awful lot of weekends. We talked to what are called institutional investors. So that might be a big tech company who wants to invest in you. We talked to other entrepreneurs. We both had titles, which happened to be useful. I was Chief Security Architect in the Office of the CTO at Red Hat. Nathaniel was Security Virtualization Architect for Red Hat. We had to work with Red Hat because we need to make sure that they were happy about what we were doing. We had our reputation in the industry, hopefully pretty good. People knew about me, they knew about Nathaniel, they knew a bit about NARCs by this stage as well. We spoke to a whole bunch of venture capitalists. Venture capitalists are people who give you money, but they want you to succeed so they can make money back. It's pretty simple. They have investors and they have pots of money and they give you money. But first you have to convince them. LinkedIn, I cannot stress how important LinkedIn is. You may hate it, but it's a great way to find people. People talk to you, find you there. You need to have a really good profile. I had an MBA from back in the day, which meant that I had at least half a clue what some of the words we were talking about meant. I bought lots of books, lots and lots of books about doing startup stuff, some of which are rubbish, some of which saved our bacon. We knew about the market. We'd been looking about what might fit. Oh, blogs, and I've got blogs and blogs. So yeah, I read blogs, and also I have a blog. It's called Alice, Eve and Bob, a security blog, aliceevebob.com, and that was quite well known. So I was known from that. We worked, as well as weekends, we worked some long evenings. And we also had what's called angel investors. So angel investors don't give you a huge amount of money, typically. They're individuals who come and show an interest in the project. And they're really useful, A, because, well, they give you money, but B, because they could give you advice. They've been there before, typically. And C, because if someone sees an angel investor, a well-known angel investor, getting involved in your project, that is something they like. So we have 5 angel investors. We have Till Schneiderite from the Bytecode Alliance and Fastly. We have Tyler Mullen from Fastly, so both WebAssembly folks. We have Sarah Novotny from the Linux Foundation and Microsoft. She was at Google, I think, at the time. We have Olivier Permel from Datadog, and we have Jim Whitehurst, who was CEO and president of Red Hat, sorry, CEO and chairman of Red Hat, and then president of IBM. So some good names. And we needed all of these because we needed to put it all together. Next slide. And we needed perseverance, and we needed hard work, and frankly, we needed some luck. And we got those things. So next slide. What happened next? Growing. Next. Well, we need to make some decisions. We managed to get $5 million seed fund as in our seed fund, which is a lot, seed round. And that was exciting. Oh, I've got a question, I think. Is that a question? Unclear, maybe not. We had to make some decisions. So next slide. I'm going to talk about these. So this is a really difficult decision. Because there were two founders, co-founders, we had to decide how much of the company we were going to own each. And I'm not going to tell you what we ended up doing, but I can tell you it was a really difficult conversation to have, but it's a conversation, if you're going to do this, you need to think about. You know, does my business experience outweigh Nathaniel's technical experience by 3 to 1? If so, should I get 75% and should he get 25%? Does my business experience match his technical experience and knowledge? Or how do you do this? It's really important to have these conversations. And we did, and they were hard conversations, but you must do it. Really can't stress early how important this is to do really early. Let's talk about the next decision we need to make. Next slide. So we had to decide how to name the company. And the first option would have been to call it the name of the project. That's kind of what Docker did. It's what lots of other folks do. But we decided we want to keep them separate because partly we wanted the community to be able to grow and exist on its own. We saw ourselves as custodians of the NX project, but that's not the same as owners. Also, as I mentioned before, the NX project was part of the Confidential Computing Consortium, so it's kind of owned actually by the Linux Foundation. So we decided not to do that. And then the next thing we came up with Congruous. We thought that was kind of a cool name. It kind of likes a hi, Hugh. Oh, okay. So we thought that's a cool name. So we created a company called Congruous. And then we spoke to the trademark lawyers, and they convinced us that we shouldn't call it Congruous. So we had a long, hard think, and we ended up with Profian, which is the name of the company today, and the name that's on the swag, on the mugs, and Profian.com is where you'll find us. It's from an Anglo-Saxon word, Old English, and it means to prove, to esteem, to attest, to make a strong statement about something. It's from the same word as to prove in English. So it's the same word, basically, or proof. Next word, next slide. No, one back. Thank you. So the next thing we need to decide is investors. So the position you want to be in when you start a company is that you have two sets of investors fighting over you, two or more sets of investors fighting over you. Doesn't always happen. But even if not, you need to make sure that you don't accept money from people who are going to damage your company or damage your future or just are out for the money. You want people who are going to support what you do. And so there are a number of things which investors can bring to the table. The first one is what are called operational venture capitalists. What that means is that they don't just invest in people, they provide services as well. So one of our investors, we work with them on the branding, for instance. They have some people who we paid at below market rates for branding. They're helping us with some of the positioning for marketing and stuff. So whilst you're too small to maybe hire a person who does branding, you can work with them and it's in their interest to make it work for you. So that's good. The next thing about VCs is that they have other people they've invested in, which means that they can introduce you to those people. You can talk to them. You can find out what worked for them. I had a very good conversation with another portfolio company just this week. Someone saying, no, don't listen to that. This is the wrong way to do it. In my experience, this is the approach you should do when you're doing this thing about sales. Hugely useful. This person's done it before. I hadn't. Also some potential customers, which would be great. The next thing they provide is connections. If they like what you're doing, they're going to introduce you to other investors and to angels and to potential customers, because they know these people and you probably don't. I mean, maybe you do, but we didn't. And so this is really helpful for us. And the last thing on this slide is advice. We made a decision, it's quite clear from the title of this slide, open company. We wanted to be as open as possible with our investors. We thought that talking to them and being transparent about stuff was good. And when we started the process and when we got the money, they said, how about we have a half hour every Friday just to chat about stuff? And I thought, well, really? Do I want to spend half an hour speaking to these people? I've just spent however much long, trying to convince them to give me money and negotiations and contracts and stuff. Taking that meeting every half hour every Friday, best thing we could have done. We don't always turn up. We cancel it if we can't make it, but it's in the diary. I can talk to them. They can talk to us. We can let them know, we ran into this problem, but we're working around it. Or what advice would you give us about doing this sort of thing? Really, really helpful. I cannot stress enough how important being open with your investors certainly seems to be to me. And the last thing, next slide, is that they don't just provide money, but they do provide money. And you do need money. Possibly not in a big crate like that, but hey. Right, let's move on to the next set of questions. So we had some other decisions that we needed to make. How open should we be? Now, there's a whole bunch of ways you can think about openness. And the first one is the code and the classic open source. Is all of our code going to be open? A lot of people out there, particularly over the last couple of years, have flirted with or gone full for a closed core model. So, they bring in the community and then the core of what they sell is closed. We made a decision that we didn't want to do that. We wanted everything to be open. A number of reasons for that. One I alluded to in some of the slides earlier is that we thought that, for security, open has got to be the way forward. Another is that we really want the community to thrive. And if you have a closed core model, that makes it very difficult for the community to thrive. It immediately we don't want you involved in the stay out way of looking at the world. I think when I go to those sorts of communities, having a truly open source model is what we decide to do. So every line of our code that we're publishing is open source, and I think all of it's published now, and that will absolutely stay that way. Next thing, what about the development? So you can do development, in closed, behind closed doors, and then just sort of publish it, throw it over the wall, make it part of the commit process. We decided we didn't want to do that. We wanted to make everything open. We wanted to have all of our stand-ups as open meetings, all of our issues boards as open meetings, our epics. So you can go to github.com/narcs and you'll see all of our repos, and you'll see you can go to our boards and see all the issues. We use Kanban on Zen Hub. It's all there, and that has meant that it's so much easier to get people in the community involved. They can suggest issues. We'll triage them with the people who suggested them. We can then decide, who should work on them, whether they should be worked on by Profian people or by other people, by interns, whatever. It's been really good. It's a great way to get people involved. And all of our chat. So when people are discussing, well, I'm not sure this is the right set of parameters to pass to this API, we don't do that internally. We have that on the outside as well. So all of our chat is on the outside. It was a big decision for us to make, entirely the right one to make, I think. We try to have a very open culture as well. Try and make it easy for people to talk to us, both inside the company and outside the company. Open door policies are great, but they're hard. It turns out that being a CEO or being a CTO means that you've got lots of other stuff you need to do as well. But being open, ready to talk to people, ready to talk to employees, other investors, possible customers, just being seen to be open is, again, I think, absolutely the right approach. It's certainly how it's worked for us. The next one I've already talked about is about being open with investors, not only existing investors, but future investors. Investors may come to you after you've got money. They've come to us and they say, look, are you looking to invest now? And we'll say no, but we'd still like to talk. Talk to us about, why you're interested in us, what might be a good fit, all those sorts of things. And the last one is financials. And this is a bit more difficult. Some companies publish all of their profit and loss accounts, some of their, all of their employee stock options, all of their employee salaries and stuff. We decided not to do this, partly because it's actually quite difficult. We're an international company, laws are different elsewhere, but also the expectations of investors, we decided made that too hard. That might happen in the future, but at the moment it's not something we're able to do. That's the only bit really I can think of our company which is not as open as it might be. And it's something we will absolutely keep thinking about. Next slide. Last bit in this one is we have an always never doc. So Profian always nevers. What should you always do, what should you never do? That includes stuff like where you should discuss what things. So I said, we do have all of our chat externally. So let's say someone has a question and they start posting it on the internal chat. We do have an internal chat. If I notice or Nathaniel or anyone else notices, this is actually a question that anyone can see because it's about Enoch's project, we'll say, let's move this discussion to the outside. Now, there are, of course, things like, how much we might charge for a product or when we're going to go live with those sorts of things or who we might hire that do need to stay inside, but we default to external. We put stuff external wherever we can. And learning what is appropriate to share and what isn't is, again, interesting. Because, if we try to be open, that's great. But, where does the line stand? And we have to keep thinking about that. I've already mentioned some things like hiring things, you probably keep that internal, those sorts of things. Another thing, press analysts. Talking to press and analysts is something that requires training because press and analysts are not always kind and they're not always in tune with you. They may misunderstand or truly misrepresent what you're saying. And it's worth having people who know what to say and how to talk to them. So we generally say, you shouldn't speak to press or analysts about Profian stuff. You want to talk about Enoch stuff? Well, let's chat. But generally that shouldn't be, unless you're trained to do so. Default to kind. If you're any company which doesn't default to kind, I wouldn't want to work for, I wouldn't want to be part of, I wouldn't want to lead. So we encourage people to be kind, but just by default. Founder availability. Nathaniel and I try to be available. It becomes increasingly difficult. We're 11 people now, which means that I got 10 people who I'm being a people manager for. And that's kind of weird because I'm not a manager really, but I'm having to do it. So keeping that availability, at the very least, you can always drop a line, in the chat and say, Mike, what about? And then other things like about benefits. So we decided we wanted to pay people a decent wage. We were hiring experts. We really needed security people or people in Rust or systems expertise. These people do not come cheap, and we shouldn't expect them to, take a salary which would maybe be fitting for a graduate straight out of university. These are people with, 5, 10 more years of experience in the industry. So we try to pay them a decent wage. We also went with an unlimited PTO policy. But say you have to take a certain amount of PTO, otherwise we'll get upset because we wanted people to do that. We're providing healthcare in certain places, pension. Again, these things depend on where you live. Next slide, we're getting to the end. So where are we? We are kind of global now. Not much on the right-hand side of the map or the big far left-hand side, but I think we'll get there. Next slide, the future. And next. So there's some more decisions we need to make. Should we concentrate on community or on company? For me, that's a false dichotomy. That is not a decision. You have to do both. So the verses shouldn't be there. That's why the question mark. So we need to think about that. The next one is balance of hires. As a techie myself, I concentrate on techie stuff really, but one of the first people we hired was a community manager, Nick Vidal, who's here today. Thank you very much indeed. He's been hugely important. At some point, we need to hire marketing people, sales people, docs people. That's going to take a while. We need to decide how we go to market, GTM, go to market. Is it a SaaS offering? Is it enterprise sales? Are we going to the financial market? Are we going to blockchain market? Are we going to healthcare? All of these things we have to decide. We need to continue asking about how open to be, and we need to continue thinking about culture. As we grow out of a purely tech mode, how do you hire people who understand what you want to do, where you want to be? So let's go to the very last slide, and I'm going to invite some questions. But I'd also, if you found this interesting, and if you think NARC sounds like an interesting thing to know about, please go to narcs.dev now and give us a star. We love those stars. They make us very happy. They make our investors happy as well, actually. But it's a way of showing that people are actually interested in what we're doing. And we think it's a really interesting thing, and we'd love to see you in our stand-ups, in our chat, whatever. I'm going to stop now. What questions do people have? Please put questions in the question answer or in the chat, and I'll answer anything I can. I can't hear you, Amber. You are muted. I'm sorry, and my lip reading is not good enough.
Well, that happens sometimes with the technical difficulties we're having today, but unfortunately that was my personal technical difficulty. It is so, though, now that I put the connection together, it is so good to see the success that you and Nathaniel are having these days. I think I talked with Nathaniel early on when this was just in the incubation state. So yeah. It is so good to see where you all have landed and where you're at. It looks like, let's see, I think Nick has posted the link in the chat. So if folks missed the link on the slide, you can get it in the chat right now. And we've got about 5 more minutes. If folks have questions, you can raise your hand, you can put it in chat, you can put it in the Q&A. But I think, you know, when I was listening to your talk, Mike, one of the things that that really was enlightening was how transparent you were about the process. So many times you see startups and you see founders who kind of keep everything so close to the chest, if you will, and they give minimal advice, minimal lessons learned, minimal of any of the ideas and points that you pointed out, and they're not as forthcoming. Was that a moment, were there ever any moments where you thought, do we really need to be doing this? Is this really the good thing? Or do we need to be this transparent? Was there ever
there were, and we absolutely had questions from investors saying, is this really the right thing to do? Surely you're doing closed conference, or you know, should you really be discussing this in the open? You know, you're giving information about your business strategy, and we felt that we're happier doing it in the open. We were careful, and honestly, you know, there was certain stuff we couldn't be open about until we got the money. And once we could then do a press release and all that sort of stuff and blah, blah, blah. And I think it's paid off. I think it's paid off in terms of the community. I think it's paid off in terms of people getting excited about in the market. Investors, again, I've got people, I could spend my entire time speaking to investors. I have no interest in doing that. But as I said, I think being open and being welcoming and saying, yeah, I'd love to talk. Let's find out what your interest is. Let's talk about technologies, talk about how you see the world is really, really helpful, really, really useful. I see there's a question from Greg. Are there any other companies like yours that you're trying to model after or learn from, especially very open, transparent ones? Well, honestly, part of it is I came from Red Hat, right? So I just default that's kind of, and as does Nathaniel and one of the other folks as well, it's kind of built in. And I came from, I can say I came from Intel before that, Intel are doing better than they used to, certainly at open, but In Red Hat, you created a document and you shared it with everyone by default. At Intel, you didn't. People had to ask. And that's not a criticism of Intel, it's just a different culture. But for me, that's the way I want to be. I want to be open like that. So Red Hat was certainly a lesson there. There were models of community. I love the Confidential Computer Consortium. I love what Steve Wally and others, he's the chair of that, are doing there. He has this minimum governance model. And I love that. It's a great process. Put as little processes you need to do to keep safe and keep things ticking along. And I think that's a great model. I mean, no, it's not a company, it's an organization, it's a project, but that really works for me. And the way that we interact there is, I think, so good. And we've encouraged Nick and other folks who are paid by Profian to get involved in other communities. And even if it's not obviously direct money for us, it's growing the visibility of the project and the company by people being seen to volunteer and do the right thing. And I think that's the right thing to do. And I haven't regretted that for a minute.
That's awesome. We've got about 2 more minutes while we're waiting to see if there's any other questions. Is there anything that maybe didn't have to do with your slides or your organization, but anything you want to leave people with, a message you'd like to tell people about that you didn't get to cover in your talk?
Yeah, it's a big step doing the startup. It's really, really scary. We nearly gave up. The stress levels are high, not just before you're doing, but when you're starting doing it. If you're really committed, if you really believe in it, really do it. It's great and scary and hard, but I really believe this is the best way to get the NARCS project and the stuff we believe in out there and into people's hands and being used. And I don't regret it almost any of the time. It's great. So yeah, please visit narcs.dev. Come to profian.com as well. That's great, but there's not much there at the moment. Go to narcs.dev, give us stars, come to the chat, get involved, download it, play with it, tell us what doesn't work, give us issues, write documentation. Come be part of the community.